Welcome to the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, episode number 135. Filmmaking is the ultimate team sport. Michael Keaton.
Broadcasting from the back alley in Hollywood, it's the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, where we show you how to survive and thrive as an indie filmmaker in the jungles of the film biz. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome, my Indie Film Hustlers, to a special Slamdance edition of the Indie Film Hustle Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Today's show is sponsored by Disruptor. If you guys are trying to get your movies or feature films or even shorts onto Netflix, Hulu, Google Play, iTunes, Fandango, or any of the major streaming services, Disruptor finally lets you in without having to go through a traditional distributor. And you keep 100% of all the revenues and your rights. So if you want more information, head over to indiefilmhustle.com/sellmyfilm. That's indiefilmhustle.com/sellmyfilm. The show is also sponsored by Hollywood Camera Work. If you guys are interested in learning how to direct actors and become a actor's director, Hollywood Camera Work has developed an amazing master course called Directing Actors. And it is almost 30 hours. And I've taken this course, and it is by far the most comprehensive directing actors course I have ever seen. So if you want to get access to this course, head over to hollywoodcamerawork.com and use the coupon code HUSTLE to get 30% off. That's hollywoodcamerawork.com and use the coupon code HUSTLE. So guys, in this episode, you are in for a treat. This has been a special Sundance edition throughout this time, but today is a special Slamdance edition of the podcast. I have one of the co-founders of the Slamdance Film Festival, Dan Mirvish, and Dan is by far one of the most entertaining guests I've ever had on the show. He is a wealth of knowledge. He tells the most amazing stories you can ever imagine. It's like sitting around a campfire, listening to how he disrupted the Oscars, how he disrupted the Sundance Film Festival, how Robert Redford called him a parasite, and all sorts of craziness. He is a rebel and an indie film hustler, to say the least. And now this is special because I got the opportunity to interview Dan twice. So in this episode, you're actually going to listen to my first interview with him, which I did a few weeks ago prior to going to the Sundance and Slamdance Film Festivals. So this is an original podcast that I did a while ago, a few weeks ago. And then also in the show notes, which are at indiefilmhustle.com/135. And if you go to those show notes, you'll be able to see the actual interview that I did with him and Sebastian Tordaz in our special series that we did over at Park City this year. And that's a completely separate interview, which has new and unique and fun stories as well. So if you can't get enough of Dan, you got him twice. You get him once in this podcast, and then you get him again in at live interview that I did with Sebastian. And again, thank you so much, Sebastian, for making those interviews as awesome as they are. And also want to give a big shout out to Media Circus PR, who helped with the recording and helped us set up the entire interview series at their amazing pad in Park City, right on Main Street. Adam and Terry, thank you so much. And you can, if you need some PR for your movies, guys, these guys are specialists in PR for independent films, and they're affordable, and they work with filmmakers all the time. So you can hit them up at mediacircuspr.com. So without any further ado, here is my interview with the one, the only, Dan Mirvish. I'd like to welcome to the show Dan Mirvish, man. Dan, thanks so much for jumping on the hustle, man. Appreciate it.
Happy to be here, Alex. Thanks for having me on.
You are, as they say, the definition of indie film hustle. You're one of the OG indie film hustlers out there.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah.
So so obviously you're the co-founder of Slamdance, and there's been a lot of myth around the creation of Slamdance. And I've heard every story under the sun about how it happened, and Slamdance sent the hitman after you and all this kind of stuff. So
Sundance
Sundance sent a hitman after you and all this kind of stuff. So can you please tell us, well, first of all, why you started Slamdance, and what the truth is about all these myths.
Well, this was back in, the first time we did Slamdance was January '95, but back in '94, I had just finished my first feature, which was called Omaha the Movie, which was set in Nebraska, which is where I'm from, but it also counted as my thesis film for USC Film School. Okay. And it was just a fun, goofy, romantic comedy. But anyway, it was but back then the way things would work was you would show your film at the Independent Feature Film Market, which is now called IFP Week, and because we all shot on film and we had these big heavy prints to lug around, and then festival programmers especially would show up, and this was in New York at they held it at the Angelica Theater, and like the year before, Kevin Smith had shown Clerks, and the programmers from Sundance saw it, and they invited him, and he, turned into Kevin Smith. So it was like, all right, that was kind of the model if you finished around that time of year, and really the paradigm was at the time that if you didn't get into Sundance, you were screwed. You were dead in the water. I had one distributor who saw the film at that same market and said, "We love your film. We want to distribute it." And it was a big indie film distributor at the time. If it gets into Sundance, I'm like, wait, but you just said you liked it so much. And we're like, well, yeah, but if we can't launch it at Sundance, what's the point?
Wow.
So everyone was very matter of fact about it. That was really, where you had to be. If you weren't at Sundance, you wouldn't get distribution, wouldn't get an agent, you wouldn't get financiers on your next film, you wouldn't get invited into other regional festivals in the US or international festivals, because they would just all kind of, for their shorthand, just take the Sundance catalog and say, all right, well, I guess these are the indie films this year. That's our block of programming. So anyway, and then at the IFFM, we met a lot of I was there with my producing partner, Dana Altman, who lives in Omaha, and was Robert Altman's grandson. And Dana was particularly isolated living in Omaha. I lived in LA at the time, just gone back to Omaha to shoot the movie. And he kind of had sort of an amorphous idea to sort of get a bunch of film, because we were meeting a lot of great filmmakers from all over the country, like to have some kind of network to talk to one another. And this was around the time the internet was taking off.
And it makes it sound old when you say something like that. It makes it sound old, like, the internet was just starting.
It was just starting, yeah. And it was like a year before IndieWire. And anyway, so we actually had a big meeting with a bunch of other filmmakers there, and we're all like, yeah, let's all stay in touch, because you're so isolated as a filmmaker, even to this day, like making your film, and then you don't start talking to other filmmakers until you're done with it, really. And so anyway, but we weren't quite sure how this idea would manifest itself. But then meanwhile, we were also talking about like how the year before, a couple filmmakers in January '94 didn't get into Sundance and did their own little renegade screenings in Park City. And one of the group of filmmakers was Trey Parker and Matt Stone, the South Park guys. But this is before South Park. They had their first film, which was their thesis project from University of Colorado, which was called Cannibal the Musical.
Yes.
At the time.
A trauma movie now.
Well, eventually it would become.
Yeah, exactly.
At the time, it actually had a different title. Anyway, they didn't get in Sundance. They did their own little renegade screening, and they'd gotten a little bit of attention for it. And I think we had the same lawyer as they did, so we had heard about these guys. And then another filmmaker named James Marandino had a film called The Upstairs Neighbor. He had done a similar kind of screening, like in a hotel room. Anyway, so we'd heard about these guys, and we were all kind of talking at the IFFM about, well, I guess our plan B is, if we don't get into Sundance, let's just do what these guys did last year and just show up. And but it wasn't until Sundance announced their list of filmmakers that year that we realized that of the 95 completed feature films that played at the IFFM that year, Sundance didn't take a single one. Wow. And we were all kind of stunned, because we thought, at least some of us, like we all thought our own films were going to get in, and these other poor bastards wouldn't get in. But we all in our own films,
Right.
And I had a color poster. I was one of the only films with a color poster. That was a big deal, So. But anyway, so none of us got in. And if you think about it, I mean, 95 was really a pivotal year for independent film in general. It was around that time that Miramax became part of Disney.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
Fine Line became part of Warner Brothers. Fox was launching Fox Searchlight at Sundance 95. And there was this kind of Hollywoodization of the independent film scene. And Sundance was kind of part of that scene and went along for the ride. And so they programmed a lot more second-time directors, great films, great directors, but they kind of left behind the niche of the first-time directors, because we'd all been influenced by kind of that first generation, the first wave of Sundance filmmakers, the Soderberghs and Rodriguez and Linkletters, and they left behind that niche, so we had no place to go. So we kind of took. It was actually Shane Kuhn, another filmmaker that we'd met out there, who, strangely enough, had also lived in LA but shot his film, which was called Redneck in Nebraska. He kind of had the idea to combine Dana's idea of this cooperative something and with this Plan B idea. And he called me up and he said, why don't we do this thing where we all show up in Park City and do a Renegade Festival? And I was like, yeah, we got nothing to lose, literally. I mean, we've already had distributors tell us they're not going to pick up the film if it's not there. So, we had a responsibility to ourselves and to our investors and our actors to show up. And then we got another guy named John Fitzgerald involved, and pretty soon we had a dozen features and a dozen shorts. A guy named Paul Rackman had the first short film that we decided to show, and we realized that each team of filmmakers had a little something to bring to the table. Paul's producing partner was a projectionist. Great, we need projectionists. There's this film called Low from New York directed by Lisa Raven, but her boyfriend at the time, Frank Hudak, he was a projectionist. We're like, great, you're in, and word kind of spread quickly among people that didn't get into Sundance that we had this thing going on. And
now was it up the hill at that time?
Well, no, that was the funny thing is initially we thought, well, none of us had really been there. Shane had been to Salt Lake. He'd spent a year at the university there, and he had some connections at the University of Utah. So initially they agreed to screen our films at the University of Utah, which is in Salt Lake City. And we looked at the map and we're like, well, yeah, that's just like a half inch away from Park City. So that's no problem for people to get back and forth from Park City down to Salt Lake.
Yeah.
Well, the short version is that we showed up at the University of Utah and nobody else did. We had screenings there, but nobody was showing up from Park City. So by the second day, these filmmakers behind Low, Lisa Raven and Frank Hudak, I tagged along with them, and we rented their film was in 16 millimeter. So we rented a 16 millimeter projector in Salt Lake and then drove up in the middle of a blizzard. And I remember because we had a screen sticking out the back window of the rental car, and I was sitting in the back with the screen, the snow pouring in my face, And we go up to Park City at like 11 o'clock at night, and the second place we found was the Prospector Hotel. And the local, pimply-faced hotel man, desk clerk, agreed to rent us a room there. Like a little tiny conference room there. Well, the conference room was literally 30 feet down the hall from Sundance's main venue, which was they had taken the Prospectors big conference room and turned it into a big screening venue. And so we set up a screening room there, and the next morning we had screenings set up 15 minutes after every Sundance screening, so that we got their overflow line. They would just pour into our screening room. And then a few days later, we figured out a way to do 35 millimeter films at the Yarrow Hotel. And by the end of the week, we were screening all of our films in Park City, and actually kept screening the films in Salt Lake too, because we're obligated to. And that was how it all started.
And what did Sundance have to say about all this?
Oh, well, they weren't happy at all. In fact, Shane, I think, still somewhere has a voicemail message from Jeff Gilmore, who was running Sundance at the time. This angry rant about us. But then before the festival even started, because we had gotten some nice press in everywhere, but the front page of Variety, Hollywood Reporter, I think New York Times, all kinds of places, and we were kind of the darlings of the press, because that was sort of the year that the press was turning on Sundance too, because they noticed this kind of Hollywoodization of indie film. Mm-hmm. Sundance kind of had gone from the darling to sort of, these angry reporters, talking about them. Mm-hmm. And we were sort of the fun little sidebar story in every article about Sundance. So Sundance wasn't too happy with us. The next year, Robert Redford called us parasites, which was kind of the best press. And actually, at one point, the University of Utah, they were afraid. They actually pulled the plug on us like a couple weeks before we started. They said, sorry, we're going to cancel this thing. And we're like, why? And they were like, well, because we're too afraid that Sundance is going to get so pissed off that they're not going to let our professors have free tickets and do programs with us during the year. And then we think it was actually Sundance who sort of got back to them and said, no, that's going to make us look really, really bad. So you have to let them keep doing it. So in a weird way, Sundance sort of saved us in a bizarre way. Mm-hmm. But anyway, then in the first few years, Sundance kept trying to outbid us for our venues out there, and they kept chasing us from one venue to another. Mm-hmm. And by this point, Peter Baxter was involved. He had produced one of the films the first year, and he still very much, kind of runs the festival. And we would put down deposits at the Yarrow Hotel and things like that, and then Sundance would sort of outmuscle us for them. And then we were very lucky to develop a relationship with the folks who run the Treasure Mountain Inn, which is a small kind of family-run hotel at the top of Main Street. Mm-hmm. Anyway, and they really took a shine to us, and we've been there for most of our 22 years now. So.
Yeah, I've been to Slamdance probably about 3 times. Every time I've ever go to Sundance, I always go to Slamdance because there's always it's a lot of fun to go up there, and the energy is a little different up there than it is down. Oh, yeah. It is the type of movies you guys play, and just the kind of real rebel, real indie, honestly, vibe, as opposed to sometimes Sundance does not have that. And it's. If anyone listening, if you guys go to Park City this year, definitely go up the hill. It is a fucking trek, especially when you're not used to the altitude. Yeah, it's like those blocks. Or something. Yeah, those 4 blocks, man. To kill you.
Long, yeah.
But a lot of fun. Now you also discovered a bunch of people there, like Chris Nolan, I know, is one. Who Lynn Shelton, the Russo brothers.
Lynn Shelton, the Russo brothers, Ryan Johnson, Ben Zeitlin, who did Beasts of the Southern Wild. We showed his first couple shorts. Napoleon Dynamite. We showed the short that sort of turned into Napoleon Dynamite, and I actually introduced. Jared to his producers on Napoleon based on his screening up there of the short. Oren Pelly was there with Paranormal Activity. That was a Slamdance film.
Wow, Paranormal. So Paranormal launched there.
It did, yeah. Wow. In fact, it sold to DreamWorks up there. Although it wasn't that big of an announcement because everyone just thought, oh, they're buying the remake rights. Like, okay, that's nice,
exactly. Who's gonna put out an $8,000 horror movie theatrically? Exactly.
Yeah, and then it was only 9 months later that they decided to put it out, almost as is. So, I mean, Slamdance has really developed into, our motto has always been kind of, or the requirements for competition films anyway, has always been first-time directors with no distribution in place and limited budgets. And so because of that, we show a lot of great, very talented first-time directors. Bong Joon-ho, big South Korean director, we showed his first film too. And then what happens is a lot of these filmmakers, then their subsequent films, their second film, or if they started with a short, then their first feature will then play at Sundance in subsequent years. And I was talking to Ben Zeitlin a couple of years ago, and he said, and I said, is it any coincidence that not only do Slamdance filmmakers then play their next film at Sundance, but when they do really well there. They win prizes, they get the best press. Mm-hmm. And he said, no, it's because we we're kind of a training camp. Once they've been to Park City once with Slamdance, they know what condos to get, when to get their flu shots, when to, what publicists to hire. And so they hit the ground running when they do get to Sundance. And I think that's made a big difference for people like Ben and Lynn Shelton, that have really, that did great at Slamdance, but once they got to Sundance, they like I said, they hit the ground running and they just take the town by storm.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
So, and I think it's taken a while for Sundance to figure out that, that's where so many of their top filmmakers have come from. They started at Slamdance. Like,
Yeah, and they don't want to hear that, but that's generally the way it is. You are the David to the Sundance Goliath, and it's
exactly.
I think that's why everyone loves Slamdance because
and also the way we do our programming is different in that it's all alumni based. So if you played a film at the festival, then more likely than not you're going to be a programmer the next year, and so it's not just a matter of these filmmakers have, played at Slamdance and then they've gone on to greater things, is that they've also stayed really involved with the festival. I mean, Chris Nolan's wife, Emma Thomas, who's his producing partner, she was a programmer for 2 or 3 years. The Russo brothers were programmers for 3 or 4 years and have been back as jurors and, a bunch of times. Ryan Johnson was a programmer for a year. So these guys have all really stayed involved, and it's much more a filmmaker community as much as it is a festival. So
very cool. When Nolan was there with the following, how was that? I mean, if you don't want me to ask it, I mean that must have been
only 14 people in the audience at his first screening, and it was kind of funny because he had actually just sold the film right before the festival started. Like we programmed it and didn't have distribution, and then based on getting into the festival at least a little bit, got picked up by a small company called Zeitgeist Films out in New York, and they showed up. It was these two kind of pretentious ladies who run it, but and they showed up at the festival, and they saw us setting up the bleachers and the seats, and they were like, "Oh, how quaint!"
Oh, son of a bitch!
and that was the last we ever saw of them. And then Chris and Emma showed up, and they're like, "Oh, so I guess our distributor put up a bunch of posters and flyers," and we're like, "No, they did nothing." And that's why you only have 14 people at your screening. So we're like, get your ass down to Kinko's and make some flyers and hit the streets and pass some shit out. And they did. And so they filled their next screening.
Wow.
And it won an award at the festival. And, he was already on his way towards making Memento at that point. But, and that would come shortly thereafter. But that was, it was a perfect example. It doesn't matter how good you are, how famous you're going to become. If you don't promote your own film, even at Sundance, no one's going to show up. So there's just, as you say, I mean, the hike up the hill is so long, and there's so many things going on in Park City. I mean,
my God, and now it's all corporate everything, like the BMW suite and this suite and that suite. And I have not been. This will be the first year I go back in probably a decade.
Oh, wow.
It's changed. I mean, even a decade ago, I was like, oh my God, this is so much.
That's already bad then.
It was already getting back. It was rough back then. But so let me ask you. So you wrote a book called The Cheerful, I love this title, The Cheerful Subversive's Guide to Independent Filmmaking. Great title, by the way. It's a really great title. Why did you decide to kind of sit down and write this book? Yeah,
I had been doing articles for mainly Filmmaker magazine, but also some for Film Thread and IndieWire and Huffington Post for the last few years, just kind of as I've been making, my own films. My last film was called Between Us with Julia Stiles and Taye Diggs. And especially after that, I learned a lot of great valuable lessons that I just wanted to, write up in Filmmaker magazine. And Scott McCauley, who's the editor of Filmmaker, he's I've known him for 20 years, and he was happy to run those articles. And a lot of them really, the response was great, like how to cast A-list actors in a low-budget film, and, what's an alternative method of, going to film festivals besides just going to Toronto or Sundance. And a lot of other filmmakers really responded to those articles. And so I had some time, and I was actually on my way to New York to getting ready to close the the option agreement I had on my on the film I just shot on Bernard and Huey. I've been working with Jules Pfeiffer, he's an Oscar-winning, Pulitzer-winning, a legend who had written the script 30 years ago, and it took us like a year and a half to find the script, and another year and a half to close the deal. And I was heading to New York I had a couple days trip there, and I was getting ready to. And we were going to close the deal, but there was some last minute hitches in the deal with lawyers and stuff. And I was like, oh no, I'm not going to be able to like meet up with him and sign the deal. I'm like, how else do I justify 2 days in New York to my wife, and my kids? So I'm like, all right, what else is in New York? Publishers are in New York. Why don't I pitch a book? And so I did. I met with a couple of publishers on that trip, and one of them was Focal Press, and they said, yeah, that sounds great. And they liked the articles that I'd already written, and I could kind of structure a book around those articles. In the end, the articles were only about, probably 40% of the book. The rest I had to actually write from scratch.
Right.
But it was fine because by then we'd gotten the rights to the movie. We'd done a Kickstarter campaign and was casting, spent several months casting and financing for that. So in the midst of all that, I had some time to, put a book together. It's amazing. You think I'm not good at multitasking for the most part, but this was actually one where the timing of the book and the movie kind of worked out well. They kind of dovetailed together nicely.
Very cool.
And honestly, it was, while I was writing some of the stuff about setting up an LLC and business plans and things like that, I was doing it at the time. So it was a good reminder for myself, like, oh yeah, this is how I do this stuff, right? I write it down, or I had a bunch of interns and we would be like researching SEC regulations, like, all right, well, I guess this will go in the book, So it worked out pretty nicely, and and I realized I'd written a bunch of articles over the years. So and also it's packed filled with poems. I do every year at Slamdance. I do an opening night poem, which is usually relevant to some element of indie filmmaking that year. Whether it's piracy or crowdfunding or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I was like, all right, I'll stick those poems in there, in the margins. And so those are in the book. And two of my kids did some of the illustrations, and there's a lot of photos. So yeah, so it was and a lot of this. So it's a lot of stories about my own filmmaking, but then I also have little sidebar articles called what are they called? Name Dropper.
Yeah, the Name Droppers, right?
Yeah. Because no one's really heard of me or my films. So I talk about like Ryan Johnson or Alexander Payne or John Carpenter or Robert Altman, people that I've had sort of brushes with over the years, and it's kind of lessons I've learned from, or Steven Soderbergh, who's been involved with Slamdance, and or the Russo brothers or people like that.
Did Soderbergh? Well, Soderbergh was his first movie was Sex, Lies, and Videotape, right?
Yeah. So he got involved with us at Slamdance because right after our first year we did Slamdance, South by Southwest had I think it was their first or second year. Mm-hmm. And I was showing my film, Omaha the Movie, there, and I met Steven at a party there, and I was kind of afraid to meet him. I thought, oh, this is Mr. Sundance. He's going to hate me,
Mm-hmm.
But it turned out he had a big falling out with Robert Redford and with Sundance, and which I had no idea about. But and so he really loved what we were doing with Slamdance, and I met Linkletter that same weekend, and he loved what we were doing too. And so Soderbergh said, "Well, I'm working on 2 films," because he was kind of souring on the sort of studio. Mm-hmm. Studio films he was doing at the time. He had just done a film called The Underneath, which I thought was a great film, but he really hated it, or hated the experience of making it. And so he was producing The Day Trippers, Greg Mottola's first film. And he said, oh, this is great. This is going to be great for Slamdance. I'm going to bring it there. So he brought it there the next year in 96. And then in 97, we showed Schizopolis, which Steven directed.
Yeah.
And which was just this crazy.
It's just nuts. I saw it on Criterion when it came out.
Yeah, but it was really inspiring for Slamdance filmmakers, and we introduced him to the Russo brothers that year in '97. He saw their first film, Pieces, and he said, "Hey guys, why don't you come out to Hollywood? I've got this little company with my pal George." and we'll put you under our wing. And that launched the Russo brothers' career.
Well, I mean, no, but one thing about Soderbergh is that he has been quietly behind the scenes helping a lot of filmmakers. I mean, he shepherded in Chris Nolan, from my understanding, and now the Russo brothers. I mean, he's and a lot of people don't know he also DPs all his own stuff as well. Because he keeps that. He's just Soderbergh's one of those really interesting filmmakers, because he just does his own thing, and he's quiet about it. Like I heard once that he's like, he drove up in his used, like, a guy like him who's got, obviously, he's a multimillionaire and all this kind of stuff, but he just shows up into his like used car or something like that, and people were like, that's Steven Soderbergh's car? I'm like, he's like, yeah, what's the problem? We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show. I just, he's really down to earth. He's just like, hey, this is just the way it is, guys. I really admired him a lot. But anyway, so I was going to ask you, what would you tell a new filmmaker about who's trying to get financing for their first film? Because there's so many filmmakers who need money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, you need money to make a movie. I mean, it's an expensive
art.
Yeah, I mean, there are ways to make a movie for less money and ways to make a movie for more money, but one way or the other, you need something. So, I mean, I'm a big fan of crowdfunding. I've used Kickstarter on my last two films. And I think it's great. I mean, I also think that philosophically, I think people need to be realistic that, look, investing in movies is never going to be a good return. It's a lousy investment. So on most of my films, I've at least tried to do this, and it's worked nicely on this last film, where we team up with a fiscal sponsor, a 501c3. In this case, I used a Filmmaker Collaborative, based in LA. And and a lot of people don't know, you can meld that into your crowdfunding campaign, whether it's Indiegogo or Kickstarter or whatever else, or Seed and Spark, and sort of, which means that anyone giving money to your crowdfunding campaign gets a tax deduction, which is really nice for them. If you're giving if someone rich is giving you money, chances are they want to get a tax deduction or a return on investment. Well, if you can't give them a return on investment, at least give them a deduction. So,
right, at least.
Anyway, so the point is, because I kind of, and I've written about this before, I see, film is more, or indie film is really more akin to, community theater or opera or symphony or public radio. Like, you don't invest in your local public radio station. No, you donate money and they give you a tote bag. It's like, all right, why should we be any different than that? And so I think crowdfunding in general, and specifically tying it in with non-for-profits, I think is a great way to raise money that way. But keep in mind, it's called Kickstarter. It's not called Kickfinisher. So, so I'm a big believer that you leverage a little bit of money, and then you use that to, either hire a casting director or pay for the lawyer to get the rights, or, or whatever other development money. And then once you get an actor, then you are in a much stronger position to raise more money through slightly more traditional means, whether it's investors or foreign sales or something else.
How do you connect with these nonprofits? Like, how does that conversation come about? I'm just curious.
Well, in documentaries, people have been doing it for 30 years. It's a long established thing in documentaries, either through a specific cause, if it's a cause-based doc, or you do it through the International Documentary Association, the IDA, and which has a really great fiscal sponsor program where people donate money to the IDA. They take a 5% fee. You get, the rest of it. And they've been doing this for years. In the narrative space, there's not as many options. Filmmaker Collaborative, based in LA, is one. The San Francisco Film Society, I think.
So then what do? You literally just call them up, like, hey, I have a movie and I'd like to work with you?
Exactly. That's it.
And then do you pitch them the story? Do they take everybody that calls them? How does it work?
No, I don't think they take everybody. The San Francisco group is a bit more specific. You've got to do a proposal. Even Filmmaker Collaborative, which takes, I think, a lot of people, I had to, do a pitch, proposal for them. There's a few arts organizations in New York. IFP in New York does it, but you can't. But I think you have to be careful because some of them do it, but then they don't allow you to mix and match nonprofit money with equity investment money. I think Filmmaker Collaborative is pretty much the only one that lets you mix and match what you get through your nonprofit contributions with equity investment money. Now, as far as the IRS is concerned, it's totally legal to do that. There's no reason why these organizations can't be doing that. But I think Filmmaker Collaborative is the only one. And then I introduced them to the folks at Kickstarter because they had never done a Kickstarter campaign through them. And the Kickstarter folks were like, yeah, there's no reason we can't do it with them. So then it allows you to mix and match, small crowdfunding with nonprofits.
So is Kickstarter associated now with Film Collaborative? So have any Kickstarter campaign, or no, it doesn't work that way?
Not every Kickstarter. No, you have to go through Film Collaborative first, and when you do all your paperwork with Kickstarter, then you say, okay, this actually the check goes to them, not to me, and it kind of goes that route. Now, each time you do this, you're losing a little bit of percentage on your donations, but so you have to.
So Film Collaborative takes a piece, of course.
Yeah, they take like 5% or something.
Yeah, it's not that bad for. But it's been nice for me because like they have a little page up for my film that even beyond the 30-day Kickstarter campaign, like I can still tell people to donate to my film, and they have, kind of indefinitely through Filmmaker Collaborative. So you don't, normally when you finish a Kickstarter campaign, like 30 minutes after you end, you get all these people saying, oh, that's too bad. I wish I could have given you money, but I just missed the deadline. Oh, well. Don't you hate that?
You go, no. Here's this other button. Click here, So anyway, the point is that, that people want to, Kickstarter and Indiegogo have really changed the paradigm of how people think about indie filmmaking from being this investment paradigm, like you get investors, you don't pay them back, they break your kneecaps, and then they don't invest in another film again. And now people are thinking about film in terms of more like public radio, like, oh, okay, my buddy has a film, I'll give him $20, or my nephew has a film, I'll give him $100. And it's more ingrained in the culture now to do that as compared to a few years ago, where there wasn't even a mechanism for that. And of course, now the interesting thing is that the SEC has now made it legal to do equity investment through crowdfunding. So Indiegogo just announced that they're going to be able to do that. Kickstarter is still saying they're not, but we'll see if that changes. And there's a few other companies out there. I mean, it's very new, so people have to, really pay attention to the rules and see if it's going to work out. But it's interesting,
Yeah, I mean, if you want to, I guess it wouldn't work for $20, but I think if you're, as far as an equity investor is concerned, but on a larger stance, so if you're trying to raise $100,000 and you're like, look, we've got blocks that, for $10,000 you could become an equity investor or something like that, or $5,000 or something.
And
like
they've really, and it also loosened the restrictions. I mean, I remember the old days, like, trying to raise money for my first film, like we had to be really, really careful. Like we couldn't even throw a party because it broke SEC
Really?
And so, or you could throw a party but not tell people what the investment was. And it's like, well, then why are we throwing a party? It was just
weird.
All these bells and whistles to jump through, and which are there for a reason. They didn't want to sucker every little old lady into giving money. I mean, these rules go back to the crash in 1929. But look, I mean, as a filmmaker, you don't learn this stuff at Tisch. You've got
no, you do not learn it at film school. There's no question.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to get an MBA almost to figure out this stuff, or read my book, The Cheerful Survival.
Obviously,
and and hopefully, I mean, I put a lot of the stuff in there, and hopefully make it interesting to read too. It's like, I mean, it's tough to write a chapter about the automated registering system for the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is called EDGAR, But strangely enough, I think I made that even an interesting little chapter, because once you get into it, it's actually not that intimidating. And a lot of the stuff you can do yourself. You don't have to hire a lawyer and spend $5,000 just to register your LLC, which some people are charging.
Oh my God.
You actually can do the stuff yourself and learn a lot so that you know how to do it the next time too.
Now, on your movie Between Us, you had a pretty insane cast. How do you attach name cast to a project that has a low budget?
Exactly. Well, that is the trick, and I think, and I've been able to kind of figure out at least one way of doing it, or a couple ways of doing it. I mean, number one, you need the material, you need the script that is going to attract casts. So then you have to think, okay, what kinds of scripts do good actors, want to do?
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
Because there's so many actors that they've made money in TV or they've made money in big features. They want to do something interesting and creative and show up at festivals. So what is it that attracts them? So there's a couple things. One is if you have a drama where they can really have big monologue scenes where actors can chew the scenery. They love that because they know at the very least they can put it on their reel, or
right.
out of it, or
show them another aspect of themselves.
Exactly, yeah. So especially if they're a comedian and you offer them a drama, or they're a drama actor and you offer them a comedy. The other thing is if you make a musical. Actors love to sing and almost never get a chance to sing.
It's very true, actually.
Yeah, but almost every actor, at least in America, got their start in musical theater in high school. And they've never had a chance to sing on film. So I did my film Open House, and originally it was just a straightforward comedy. And then when I kind of realized that about actors, my writing partner and I, Larry Maddox and I, we turned it into a musical. And sure enough, we got, Oscar nominee Sally Kellerman, because it turned out she was a cabaret singer, but hadn't sung in a film musical since Lost Horizons in 1969.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
We got, Anthony Rapp from Rent to be in it. And we never would have got, and that was a $20,000 budget. It was tiny.
Right.
It was the first film shot on the DVX 100. And
that's my favorite. That workhorse back in the day.
Yeah. We were actually the first. Yeah. So, but anyway, but we got some great TV actors and some other great film actors. And, but it was literally because it was a musical, and we said they were going to sing live on set, which they also never, very rarely get a chance to do. Mm-hmm. That got us that cast. In the case of Between Us, it was the material. I specifically looked for an off-Broadway play. I looked for a play and found a great off-Broadway play. It had been a successful play called Between Us, written by Joe Hortua, and I knew it had, number one, it was. Production-wise, it would be fairly simple to do because it was 4 people in 2 rooms kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It turns out it was a lot more complicated than that. But
it always is.
It always is. But I knew that the roles were really, strong, dramatic roles that would attract actors. And so we wound up getting David Harbour, who's now famous from Stranger Things, and he'd been in the original play, Julia Stiles, Melissa George, Taye Diggs, and also kind of being racially diverse helped. Taye wasn't getting offered sort of, non-racially specific parts. Mm-hmm. And this was, he could have been, the part could have been anything. So I was like, yeah, let's get an African-American actor in there, and Taye loved it. It was a real departure for him. And from the TV work on Private Practice or something that he'd been doing for a few years, it was a chance to kind of get back to his theater roots. So,
and he got to work with Julia again.
No, he'd never. No,
I thought that didn't they work on what was it?
No, that was a different black guy.
Oh, sorry. Oh God, that's horrible. I thought Taye was. I swear to God, I thought it was Taye.
That doesn't make you a racist. That's okay. Yeah, no, we got that a lot.
Did you?
Yeah, but the other thing though is to have really strong female roles, because if you think about it too, there are so many more actresses than actors in Hollywood, and again, go back to every high school drama program in America, and it's always like 80-20, women, girls to boys. And that carries through into Hollywood, that there are a lot more famous actresses who rightly so complain that they never get good roles than there are actors. And because of that, if you have some really good roles for women, and especially slightly older women, or older than 22, you will get you will get some really great actresses. I mean, we had a lot of people who really wanted those parts, and between us, I mean, they were fighting for those parts, and same thing on Bernard and Huey, which is two male leads. And in the end, we got Oscar winner Jim Rash and David Koechner. But for our women parts, we had we had some great actresses. We wound up with Sasha Alexander from Rizzoli and Isles, but she'd been in a lot of other fun things, and Bellamy Young and Nancy Travis, and it was and they were all amazing in the movie.
Now, do you go out to their agents directly, or do you have a casting director?
Well, I always work with a casting director, and I've had different ones kind of on all my films. But I think it is very important at this level for the director of the film, the filmmaker, to have their own relationships with talent agents. So at ICM, at UTA, at Gersh, wherever they are, and start early, because I remember on Open House we were dealing with this assistant at Gersh named Alex Yarrow. She's now the head talent agent at Gersh. So I'm like, hey Alex, how you doing? How are your kids? Oh, I'm fine. So. Mm-hmm. You want to build those relationships and sustain them over years, because actors are going to come and go. You can be best friends with an actor, and maybe they get famous, and maybe they're available to work the week you need them, but more likely not. But an agent or a manager at some of these places, they are going to have a stable of actors for an entire career. And
great advice. Great advice.
So, for all those filmmakers going to Park City and they're busy trying to get their own agents, it's like, no. First of all, an agent in Hollywood is not going to care about an indie director because they can't make money off of you.
Right.
But a talent agent who has actors, it behooves them to meet directors too, because you're always going to be giving their actors work. Whether it's paid work or not paid, well, it doesn't matter, because agents are always trying to get good, meaty material for their clients too, because it keeps their clients happy. Mm-hmm. So they love developing relationships with directors just as much as we need them. And so that has really helped me in the long term. And that's part of what I get into in the book and talking to people, is that you're not just making a film. You don't want to just be a filmmaker. You want to be a films maker, plural. Mm-hmm. You're developing a career out of this. And so, even if you meet an actor on one film and you don't cast them, you know what? You may cast them on the next film, or if you develop a relationship with an agent or a manager, on the talent side, and you don't cast their clients this time around, that's cool. You're going to need them, next time around. And by then they may have been promoted from assistant or junior agent. They may be running the agency. Mm-hmm. And, but you're still the guy that had breakfast with them in Park City 10 years ago. And they're like, hey dude, I remember you, Mm-hmm. So, but at the end of the day, it's, if you've got the material, that you don't need the relationships. If you've got the good parts for the right actor, it doesn't really matter if you have any money,
Right.
Yeah.
If it's good work, it's good work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now between us, it was, I guess I was watching your video on the book, and it said it was sold in 144 countries.
Yeah, including North Korea and Iran.
So how in the gods? Well, first of all, what was the process of that? So for people listening, understands how you actually sell a movie, and then after that, how the hell did you get to North Korea and Iran? Right.
So on that film, we got a foreign sales company. I mean, a lot of filmmakers, when they're right out of the gate, there's a little bit of confusion about foreign sales agents, foreign sales companies versus producers rep and producers agents. But basically, for an American indie film, there's two big sets of rights. There's North America, basically the U.S. market, and international. And usually you're dealing with different people selling both sides of it. So for international, you get a sales agent or foreign sales company. It can kind of be one. Those words are a little bit interchangeable. Mm-hmm. And these are usually these kind of scruffy little companies, just like 2 or 3 people each. And they go to all the film markets, like the AFM, the American Film Market in Santa Monica, or they go to the Berlin market or the Cannes market, not the festivals, but the markets. And then they're just dealing with, let's sell, pay-per-view to, Sri Lanka or whatever. So the Sri Lankan pay-per-view guy goes to the market and they're buying films, So in my case, I dealt with a foreign sales company called Premier Entertainment, I think was the name of them. They changed names a few times, but nice guys, and I got along well with them. And they were able to sell the film. I think they only sold it about 10 times, but each time was to a big market. So like they sold Latin American rights, and that meant every country in Latin America. They sold the Chinese rights, and if you look carefully in the contract if you sell a film to China, 9 times out of 10, that includes the rights to North Korea. Whether it actually played in North Korea or not, I don't know.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show. Right.
But I know that, and I know from the contract, Ava DuVernay's film Middle of Nowhere was bundled with my film. They bundled like 9 films together, sold them to a Chinese company. So both of us have our films available in North Korea. But I know, like, and same with the Middle East. It was like all non-Israel Middle East was one company. And that included Iran, that included Syria, that included Iraq. Right. But sure enough, like I go to like these Persian pay-per-view sites, and the film is available, with like Persian subtitles or something.
So that really is interesting, because you have a movie that's basically a character piece with four people who don't. I'm assuming none of the cast have major draws overseas.
Not huge.
Huge. They're not like Van Damme.
Julia Stiles and Taye Diggs. I mean, their name, and in faces, some cases, Melissa George. She's big in Australia and England. But honestly, they haven't sold Australia and England yet, so I don't know what's going on there.
Right. So generally speaking, they're not. So it goes against a lot of preconceived notions that in order to sell an indie movie overseas, you have to have Steven Seagal, Jean-Claude Van Damme, or Chuck Norris.
Right. or be a genre film, be a horror film.
Right.
Film.
This is an indie character piece with basically 4 people talking in a house.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's really interesting. So have you seen other films go down? Because I really haven't heard many American indies get this kind of distribution before.
Well, they probably have. You just haven't heard about them.
Right.
And it was literally like me looking very carefully at each contract and adding up the territories. And I was like, oh, wow, that's 144 countries. Like, holy cow, that's a lot of the world, And, but it's out there, and that, and then we had a separate company, a separate distributor, Monterey Media, who did North America, and they got it onto, we did a small theatrical release in like 50 cities, but then, more importantly, really, they got it onto Netflix and Showtime and Stars and, plus all the, iTunes and Amazon and Hulu and all those things too. So, but yeah, I think it's really nice for your investors and your Kickstarter backers and everyone and the actors, and the crew to say, by the way, our film is out there around the world. I saw a pirated bootleg version of the film with Japanese, not Japanese, German, not subtitles, but it was dubbed in German.
So someone actually bootlegged it. And
well, there was a German distributor.
Oh, gotcha.
German DVD distributor had done the the dubbing, but then I saw it on YouTube and I was like, well, this is kind of funny. But
which brings me to another quick question. Yeah. What's your philosophy on piracy? And because I know a lot of filmmakers jump. I mean, obviously it's horrible, but
funny you should say that. I have a whole chapter in my book about it. And again, this is based on a couple articles I had done about piracy, and it's and I've been working with a couple anti-piracy organizations. But my feeling is a little bit more nuanced than like sort of the standard Hollywood, sue the bastards kind of thing. Because as an indie filmmaker, you're absolutely affected by it. When I see Between Us on all these websites, I'm like, I'm not making any money off this. On the other hand, my distributors have kind of stopped paying me anyway. So it's like, as as an indie filmmaker,
Right.
you're always kind of torn. On the one hand, you want your art, we're artists, right?
Mm-hmm.
Capital A or small a. You want your art to be out there. You want your films to be seen by the most number of people, get the most clicks and the most hits and the most, whatever shares. On the other hand, you've got a fiduciary responsibility to your investors to say, no, we actually need to make money, and we can't make money if the film is pirated. So, which kind of brings me back to the point that if you can raise your money through donations, either nonprofit donations or crowdfunding or whatever, then you literally don't have an obligation to pay back your investors. Well, if you don't have an obligation to pay back your investors, then you're not really obligated to make money off your film. Then go ahead and have it pirated. And then that way, at least you're getting the most number of people to see it. Now, most filmmakers, if you've got a feature, that's not really where you're at. But if you've got a short, I did one short, put it on YouTube for free, 500,000 people have seen it. I'm like, that's awesome, but I'm not obligated to anyone to give their money back. Right. On a feature, though, it is different because you do usually have investors or residuals for yourself or your actors that you do want to make money. So that is the big challenge facing indie filmmakers. And it's there's no easy solution, because if you're a studio film, I don't want to make it sound like it's easy for the studios, but they actually have a room full of lawyers and interns and paralegals that can send out cease and desist letters and take down notices to YouTube and things like that. If an indie filmmaker, for me to do that, it's literally an hour out of my day every day. Mm-hmm. If I really want to take down all the copies of my film, everywhere in the world. On the other hand, if I do that so much, no one's going to see the film ultimately, Mm-hmm. So it's not an easy, there is no solution to it, mm-hmm. except to make your films as a nonprofit, Right. That is really the only solution to it. And then you don't have to worry about piracy. But, most people aren't in that situation. So you got to worry about it.
Now, in your book, you use that name dropping. I guess the name dropper,
right? Yeah.
With some very legendary now filmmakers. Can you maybe share a few truth bombs from like a Chris Nolan, Russo brothers, or Lynn Shelton?
Yeah. Well, the Russos were great. They, Joe Russo, a couple years ago, he was back at Slamdance, and we were having our 20th anniversary. He said, "Oh, Dan, Mirvish, you got to get back in. You got to get into TV, man. That's where the real action is." Of course, easy for him to say after doing years of Arrested Development, Community. Mm-hmm. The Russos are now doing,
Captain America's Adventures,
and loving it. I mean, they're having a great time doing it. They love it. But so I said, "Okay, Joe, I'll take you up on that." And so I spent a concerted 3 months trying to get myself hired as a TV director. Mm-hmm. And literally for every day for about 3 months, I got a meeting with a studio or a network or a production company, just to talk about TV directing. And I wrote an article for Filmmaker magazine about it at the time, which is now, a chapter in the book. And I talked to Joe at the end of this whole process. And he said, so what came out of this 3 months of meetings? I said, well, he said, did you get hired? I said, no, I didn't get hired. I said, but I got $250 for writing an article in Filmmaker magazine. So he's like, all right, well, that's something, So, and eventually that made its way into the book. So, but yeah, I mean, I think the thing too about all these guys is that if you meet famous director friends, you've got to also know what you can get out of them at the end of the day. Chris Nolan's not going to invest in my next film, but for example, in casting between Bernard and Huey, this is a great example. I was pitched Jim Rash, who's as an actor had done Community, but as a screenwriter, he won an Oscar for co-writing The Dependents, Alex Payne's film. Mm-hmm. And so right before meeting with him, I, texted or sent a quick email to Joe Russo, and I was like, Joe, how's Jim to work with? Because I knew he'd worked with him on Community, and he wrote back right away, he's great, he's awesome, you should cast him. And I did, and Joe was right. Jim was fantastic to work with and is amazing in the film. So, I think that's the interesting thing is to realize is that, as a filmmaker, you need to build this network of other filmmakers, because believe me, some of them will become famous. Some of them will become, powerful people in Hollywood. And it doesn't mean that they're going to do any direct favors for you. But when it comes to like sharing information on actors and things like that, or on distributors or agents, that's where those friendships and those relationships are really going to be helpful and useful to you. It's not like Joe's going to get me, the next Marvel movie.
Right. No, but Joe could easily introduce you to somebody at a party that might be able to help you in the next project.
Yeah,
possibly,
yeah.
or
like I said, like you have to know kind of what to ask and when to ask,
right,
these things. So,
right.
I was privileged enough to get to know Robert Altman when he was alive, and I talk about his advice in here, about casting, casting being 90% of directing,
Mm-hmm.
but it's taken me a good 20 years to figure out what the other 10% is.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
But getting into the nuts and bolts of like, okay, how do you do, he was such a pioneer in using individual lavalier mics on different tracks,
and MASH,
MASH and Nashville. And really I've taken that to heart with all my films. But getting to know sort of the reasons why he did that, which really not a lot of people talked about, it was because he didn't want the lowest paid member of the crew, the boom operator, to be the one deciding who he's going to listen to in the mix. He said, I'm the fucking artist. I want to make that decision. And the only way I can do it is if I record sound on everyone. And then in the mix, I'm the one listening to this person or that person. And it was like, wow, that is,
it's brilliant, actually.
Yeah, it's brilliant. But it also did so many other things too. You get better performances from the actors because they never knew when they were being recorded and when they weren't being recorded. It kind of dovetailed with his use of the long, zoom lenses too. But it meant that he never had ADR, which again meant that he always got better performances. So, and it was, so it was things like that you pick up from directors here and there. Or, I talked about, working on a John Carpenter movie where I shot the behind the scenes, the EPK footage. And I think that is a really great opportunity for filmmakers. If you're between projects or something, if you can shoot EPK footage on, even if it's just your friends' films, you will learn so much because you literally get to sit right next to the director. And whether it's just your other fellow filmmaking friend or someone like John Carpenter, you don't always get that access. So, so it's things like that. Like, okay, what do you do between projects?
And then you could either see how it's done right or how it's done wrong. Either way, you're learning.
Exactly. Yeah, either way. Yeah, either way. Like anytime you're on a set. I mean, honestly, I survived by renting out my house to commercials. We just had a frozen broccoli commercial here like 3 days ago.
Nice.
Which is great. That paid the mortgage this month. But but I was like, I'm on set like, wow, what, they use this kind of camera, this kind of lens, and this kind of slider. Like, oh, I've never seen that slider before. Like, how did they get steam to come out? You learn so much just from the pace and the tempo of these things, even if it's completely different than what you're going to be doing.
Now, what's your feeling on the state of self-distribution today? Because I know it's a lot different than when you first started Slamdance back in the day.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, right after we did Slamdance, I decided to do self-distribution on my film on the movie. And we wound up playing it in 33 cities in all across the country. And it actually, and we started in the Midwest. We started in Omaha and worked our way out to the coasts and wound up with an 11-week run at Laemmle's, here in LA, which was pretty remarkable. And it included me wearing a sandwich board in front of the Sunset 5 Theater for most of those 11 weeks. And the interesting thing about it, I mean, is that we didn't make money, but we didn't lose money. It was sort of a revenue neutral thing. But it was fun. It got the film out there and it got us a theatrical release where we wouldn't have had one otherwise. But the interesting thing is that you don't necessarily have to lug a 35 print around anymore. But a lot of the techniques really haven't changed at all, for self-distribution. You still have to do the same legwork as far as finding bookers for your film and finding venues and then promoting. And whether you're literally wearing a sandwich board or doing it on Twitter and Facebook and whatever else, it's the same amount of time and effort and shameless self-promotion, regardless of what it is. I mean, I've thrown raw steak at audiences at screenings before. Mm-hmm. I've thrown corn cobs at audiences, whatever it takes to get people, in there. And so strangely enough, like, I don't think anything has changed. I mean,
how about the digital version of it, like all the options now that you have online, like through. Yeah,
but it's still all about like, are you willing to put on a digital sandwich board? And some people are and some people aren't. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So it's a little less stressful on the shoulders and the back, but that's about it. But yeah, so I really. Yeah, I mean, the techniques change every year, as far as which social media platforms do what and do this, and you've got the tug and the this and the that. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to the same kind of thing. Do you have people on the ground in that city that can help you promote the film? Are you getting press? I mean, to get press for your own film. This really hasn't changed in 20 years or 25 mm-hmm. years. You can't get local newspapers to review your film unless you have a theatrical release. And you can't get national media to review your film unless you at least start in New York. Mm-hmm. Not even LA counts. And even then, you really have to tell them it's a national release. Like, just booking one theater in New York isn't going to get the New York Times even anymore
to look at you, right?
To review the film. So it's funny, like with all the talk about VOD and day and date and all that, the bottom line is you still can't get reviews unless you are a theatrical release in a significant way. And that hasn't changed at all. People kind of think it has, but it really hasn't. You're still screwed if you're the indie guy and you're just booking one theater at a time.
So what advice would you give a filmmaker just starting out in the business?
Well, marry well. That's for one. I recommend either going to med school graduation ceremonies, or better yet, find an entertainment law student who is going to be a successful entertainment lawyer. And then that way you get a well-heeled spouse who is also can be your entertainment lawyer, and so you're kind of killing two birds with one stone.
Nice.
So I definitely recommend that. Don't date actors or actresses, or not if you plan to marry them anyway. And certainly not other filmmakers. Jesus,
that's just death. I understand completely.
That's right there. Yeah. So, but yeah, people think I joke about that, but
no, I know.
Yeah. The other thing that I talk about this in the book too, is the Cheerful, Subversive Guide to Independent Filmmaking, available wherever fine books are sold online.
Don't worry, we will promote the heck out of it. Don't worry.
But is that the festival circuit? I mean, we just talked about theatrical self-distribution, but really, even if you get a good theatrical release, not that many people are seeing your films in theaters anymore. So, but what I really advocate is a volume approach to film festivals. Is that everybody is kind of so focused on where they're going to premiere and whether it's Sundance or Toronto or South by or whatever it is. But there are so many really great festivals around the country and around the world, and festivals do a really good job of putting butts in the seats. Like most festivals, you don't have to promote your film that much, and you will get a pretty full house. And really, that's the one place where you can engage with an audience with your introductions, with your Q&As, with your talkback sessions, or cocktail parties with actual audiences that are real cinephile audiences that want to see films and want to meet filmmakers. And if you've made a comedy, you hear the laughter of an audience. If you've made a drama, you hear them crying. If you've made a comedy and nobody's laughing, you tell people it's a drama. So the festival experience in and of itself, as artists, which such as we are, is, I think, a really richly rewarding experience. And so many people I see wait so long to get this big premiere at this big industry festival, and meanwhile they pass on so many other great festivals, smaller regional festivals, But, that regional isn't a dirty word if the region they're sending you to is the Bahamas or Athens or Germany,
Yeah, I know, right?
Who wouldn't want to go to all these places, And then meanwhile, you're meeting other filmmakers, you're meeting actors, you're meeting, potential investors, you're seeing the world. It's like you're getting laid, whatever it takes. I'm a big advocate of just the festival experience in and of itself. If you've got the time and inclination to do it and haven't moved on to your next film, because it does prevent you from doing that. But yeah, that's the other advice I have for filmmakers is that, the festivals have the word festive in there. So you should go to them and have fun and make the most of them. And even if you don't get into, especially this time of year, even if you didn't get into Sundance or you didn't get into Slamdance, go to Park City. Like you'll meet more people and have a better time if you don't have a film in a festival, or if you're in LA, go to, this week there's the Culver City Film Festival. Go see films, meet filmmakers. Just because your own film isn't playing there doesn't mean you can't be a part of a festival or volunteer at your local festival. Because also you see what other films are out there in a way that you really don't otherwise.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show. Now, these are the last two questions are the questions I ask all my guests. What is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film business or in life?
At least in the film business, it was that it took me 20 years to figure this out, that you're not going to get, there's no incentive for agents or managers to sign you as an indie film director. Because literally, if you're spending 5 years between films, and it will take you 5 years, but at least between some of your films, at most you're maybe making $100,000 if it's a really successful indie film. An agent is making 10% of that, and they've spent 5 years to get that. There's no real incentive for them. There's a reason agents are called lit agents, and they're not called DIR agents, because they sell scripts, because they can make a lot of money in a very short amount of time by selling spec scripts. Anyway, so it's taken a long time to realize that, I wasted a lot of time in the early part of my career chasing the agencies and chasing agents. And I think it's important if you want to be a TV director, it's important if you want to write a script. But as an indie film director, chasing agents and managers is a waste of time. To chase for yourself, what is a much better use of your time is to chase those talent agents that we talked about earlier, because then you develop those relationships, and then you're also not beholden to any one agency or one agent. You can travel among all of them.
So basically, and you speak the truth, my friend. It's very true, and people don't understand that. They don't understand that it's a business, and agents are there to make money. They might love you, but it's about a business. They got to make money. So if they bring in an indie filmmaker, a lot of times that I've seen my indie filmmaker friends get agents, generally speaking, is because the agent sees that either they can package a new movie or they could throw them into TV.
Exactly.
And those are and if it's something that they could turn around quickly, or they feel that they can make a decent amount of money with, then they'll take them. If not, forget. Like, if you're just like that, my job is making $10,000 movies for the rest of my life. It's going to be tough getting an agent. But even look at someone like Joe Swansburg or Lynn Shelton.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Lynn's in TV now, and so is Joe.
Joe shot a TV show across the street from my house a few months ago. I was
nice.
Hey Joe, what are you doing here? Directing for Netflix or HBO or whatever it was.
He's doing his Netflix show. I think he's got like a couple. Yeah, because now I think he got the taste of it. He's like, oh, this is nice. Oh, I'm just going to keep doing this.
Great. I'm very happy for him and jealous completely. But
did Joe ever go to Slamdance?
He's been to Slamdance. Mm-hmm. I don't think we've ever shown any of his films, but I've seen him up there a bunch. So
yeah, of course.
And there's a lot of overlap between some of his pals and ours. So so we've gotten to know him over the years. But no, I don't think we've ever shown any film that he directed, which is remarkable because he's made like
40. 38, 37.
But look, it's amazing. I mean, he just kept churning them out, whether they were good, bad.
Didn't care.
Doesn't matter. He just can't. I mean, it's a whole different ethos. I couldn't keep up with that pace. but God bless him, more power to him, and also working with other filmmakers and collaborators. He was great about that.
Yeah,
so
he was acting,
and eventually you build, and it's also a great lesson that it's not like any of his early films, like any one film really hit, but he built a body of work. He built a career that then eventually, TV people will be like, of course, why wouldn't we hire Joe Swanberg to be a director? So,
but it took him a decade.
Yeah. Exactly.
It took him a decade, and that's what people don't understand. A lot of filmmakers are like, "Oh wow, a decade? You mean you don't go to Slamdance or Sundance and just get a check from Fox Searchlight or Harvey just shows up and gives you a check and you're on your way?" It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, no, you just got to keep making more of them, and that means you can't get so precious about your first one that you're chasing it around the globe for years and years. You gotta
what's next?
Yeah.
And the last question is 3 of your favorite films of all time.
Repo Man.
Nice.
Buckaroo Banzai.
Yes.
And I'll say, Fail Safe.
Wow. You know those? Actually, after speaking to you for a little bit over an hour now, they're perfect picks for you, sir.
Yeah.
They're perfect picks, man. Well, listen, where can people find you, by the way?
My house. I'm here.
No, don't give your personal address out. No, online. Where can people find you?
Go to danmirvish.com. They can reach, danmirvish.com, and then that has links to the books, to my movies, to everything. And then in Park City, I'll be up at Slamdance. I always host the. I read a poem on opening night, but then I always host some of the Q&As and then do the Hot Tub Summit. We didn't talk about that, but that's a big thing I do every year. And we've been doing that for about 10 years. I think we'll be doing it this year. I'm not sure exactly when that is, but basically it's a big panel discussion in a hot tub where we talk about everything we just talked about. So
nice.
But yeah, it's the wettest panel discussion in Park City. So,
no pun intended.
So if you're in Park City, come to the top of Main Street, Treasure Mountain Inn, just look for me.
Very cool, bro. Man, Dan, thanks so much for taking out the time to being on the hustle, man.
Fun. Appreciate it.
Dan was an absolute pleasure, and I had so much fun. I actually interviewed him again, like I said, at Slamdance at Park City this year. So please check out our show notes to check out that other interview that I did with Dan at indiefilmhustle.com/135. And if you want to get a link to his amazingly titled book, The Cheerful Subversive's Guide to Independent Filmmaking, from pre-production to festivals to distribution, again, head over to the show notes and I'll have a link for it there. And again, guys, with this special series, I am going out daily. So again, don't get used to it, but it will be, I have another one out tomorrow. And I think we got maybe 2 more. I have 2 to 3 more. I'm not sure, but I at least got 2 more for sure coming out. And I hope you've enjoyed this series. Please let me know what you guys think of this. I took a lot to go to Sundance, man. It was a lot of work. So if you guys like this and want to see more of it, please give me a shout out. You can always email me at ifhsubmissions@gmail.com. Also, if you have any questions about the business, I will have an Ask Alex episode coming up soon. So you could just, again, email me at ifhsubmissions@gmail.com. If you have any questions about the business, about my Sundance trip, about anything, I'll pick a few questions and answer them on the show. So also, we are less than a month away from the world premiere of This Is Meg. It's incredible how I got started with this little movie, and all of a sudden I'm going to be world premiering at an amazing festival like CineQuest. So I will put links to, if you're in the area, if you want tickets, man, I'd love for you guys to come out and support. That would be amazing. So if you're going to be at CineQuest this year, please hit me up. We'll grab a coffee, do something. It would be awesome. So also be adding some new lessons and new courses to the Indie Film Syndicate at indiefilmsyndicate.com. So keep an eye out on that. And I'll be posting about those new lessons for the This Is Meg course, as well as some other stuff that I have in the works. So guys, thank you for everything. As always, keep that hustle going, keep that dream alive, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Indie Film Hustle podcast at indiefilmhustle.com. That's INDIEFILMHUSTLE.com.